Hi, I'm Siobhan McHale, and I'm the Executive General Manager of People, Culture and Change at Dulux Group. I'm also the author of the book, The Insider's Guide to Culture Change. On today's show, you'll learn three key things. The first myth I bust is that HR is not solely responsible for culture change. The second thing that you'll learn is that culture is much more than just employee engagement. And the third thing you'll learn on today's show is the 4 practical steps in order to create a culture that delivers, grows, and adapts. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? Well, if you are dedicated to up-leveling your leadership, then you have got to be committed to creating a world-class culture. You know that. But the truth is, there are so many culture experts out there espousing their wisdom about how culture is all about employee engagement. And as important as that is, what if that kind of culture change is missing the target? Have you thought about that? Well, stay tuned, because that's where we're going on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Go to dovbaron.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how can we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart, your mind, and your soul have been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and often intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. We're talking about astronauts, neuroscientists, philosophers, holy people, neurosurgeons, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, Grammy award-winning entertainers, even some folks you might completely disagree with until you listen and you discover they are truly fascinating. Simply go to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into the delicious Curiosity Bites. As always, you can find both of our shows, this one and Curiosity Bites, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. We always need your help in staying relevant, though, so please get over there wherever you tune in. Rate, review, and subscribe to the show. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. We are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. You can also listen to us, of course, on Google Home or Alexa by simply saying, play Dov Baron podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. We have all come to understand the power and importance of corporate culture. But very few people truly understand what culture actually is. We tend to think of culture as the employee experience. And even though that it is that, maybe it's something much more strategic. So let's be honest, creating cultural change, it can seem massively overwhelming. So how can we make the changes needed to meet the needs, to deliver, to grow, and to adapt in an ever-changing world of business? And what's more, if you're going to get that help, who will actually be able to give you real help with it? Well, let's find out together, because our guest today is Siobhan McHale. Now, she is an insider, having been an executive in charge of cultural change in a series of multinational firms. One of these is the inside job that was done for 7-year change initiative at the Australia Bank ANZ. You may have heard of them. That company transformed it into the highest performing bank in the world In fact, Professor John Cotter, you may have heard of him, he used Siobhan's work at ANZ as a case study at Harvard Business School to teach the MBA students how to manage change. In 2020, Siobhan was selected as a member of the Global Thinkers 50, whose ideas have power to change the world. She is currently employed as Executive General Manager of People, Culture, and Change at the Dulux Group. That being said, Siobhan McHale is a culture transformer. She has worked across 4 continents, helped thousands of leaders create more agile and productive workplaces, and her recent book, The Insider's Guide to Cultural Change, has been described by culture pioneer Carolyn Taylor as the most groundbreaking thinking on how to change workplace culture that she's ever seen in many years. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome the culture transformer, Siobhan McHale.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Dove, and it's a pleasure to be here today.
And thank you for getting up very early. It's 5 a.m. where you are. My God, girl, you are ready to go. That is fantastic. She told me she's got her Earl Grey tea right by her side. She's ready to go. There it is. So let's jump in here. Let's in the context of culture, because this is really your subject. I think that a lot of people are misguided around a lot of things in leadership and particularly in culture. So in the context of culture, what is the question we should be looking for answers to that most people are just not? Like, I think we tend to put our eye on one thing and forget that it's actually about something else. So in the context of culture, what is the question we should be looking for answers to that we're not?
Most people, when you ask them, how's your culture, they immediately go to engagement or employee experience, whereas that's sort of the wrong place to start. The starting point is, what is your strategy? And the second question is, do you have the right culture to enable that strategy? Mm-hmm. So that could be a growth culture, a customer-oriented culture, an innovative culture, a disciplined culture, etc. So is your culture, Peter Drucker once said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what I say is that culture and strategy are not competitors.
Okay, so that right there is an interesting piece, because as you said, Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, but you're saying they're not in competition with each other. They're not competitors. They're not adversarial. And it seems like we seem to think that, because strategy seems to be very much, do this, do that. And culture seems to be people, and, which is a lot softer and has more nuance to it. But you say they come together. Help us to understand that, Siobhan. I think there's a lot of confusion there.
Yeah, so I say culture enables strategy. So, if you, for example, where I'm working at the moment at Dulux Group, I was hired to create a more growth-oriented culture. At the ANZ Bank, over a 7-year period, we created a culture that was customer-centric. So it went from the worst performing bank in the country in terms of customer satisfaction over a 7-year period to the highest performing bank in the country on customer sat, doubled its profits, tripled its share price, and became the #1 bank globally on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. So we're talking hard measures here. We're not talking soft, fluffy stuff here. We're talking about a business enabler.
But if culture is done right, then it should automatically make the company more profitable and more efficient. And I think we tend to look at culture as you said, fluffy. I always, when people talk to me about culture, and I get furious with people like, think it's about beanbags and cappuccino machines, and it's not. You're saying it's a way to facilitate the function that you want the company to be most known for. Is that right? Am I understanding it right?
Yeah, so you might say, well, we want this company to be higher performing and grow. We want it to grow. We want the company to deliver better returns. We want it to be great quality. Well, your culture might, in fact, be blocking that. So if you've got perennial noise, ongoing dysfunction, and issues that keep on coming back, recurring issues, the chances are you've got a culture issue. And many leaders keep layering in technical solutions to this complex adaptive problem of how things are working. So culture is about how your business is functioning in order to deliver on its strategic imperatives.
So to put this in context, and maybe I'm off, and if I am, please feel free to correct me, but we tend to look at culture in the context of how are our people doing, are they engaged, etc. And what you're suggesting is saying, hold on a second, what do we want to do? And how do we build a culture that does that? That therefore will automatically engage people because it's that. Is that, am I
Yeah,
on track?
yes, it is. Let me give you an example.
Thank
So
you.
walked into the ANZ Bank. Early 2000s, bank bashing was a national hobby. Everybody hated the banks and they hated ANZ. When I
What
went
year was
to
that? Did you say? I'm sorry.
early 2000s, so this was
Okay.
a 7-year journey.
Yeah.
And basically, head office was palatial, beautiful, marble pillars stretching into Gothic ceilings, plush carpets on the floor, spacious offices overlooking the bay in Melbourne. A visit to the bank branches later that week revealed a different story. Paint
Mm.
peeling from the walls, frayed carpets, customers shuffling in long queues, not getting answers to their questions. So you'd say, well, where do you intervene there? Well, essentially, it was a culture problem. And head office was taking up the role of order giver,
Yes.
making all the decisions and telling the branches what to do. The branches had taken up the role of order taker and being victims and really just taking instructions. And there was a pattern or hidden agreement between head office and the branches, which was you're to blame for the poor customer satisfaction. And the branches would go, no, you're to blame for the poor customer satisfaction. And round this pattern of blame was going, and it
Mm-hmm.
was the energy from the company and causing it to have the worst customer satisfaction scores in the whole country, basically. So seeing that pattern, seeing the hidden agreement was the key to unlocking the change that we needed to make there.
Right. And I know that for you, a big focus is on recognizing the patterns. Um, so walk us through for our viewers, for our listeners, in how do we start to recognize the pattern? Because like you said, they're blaming us and we're blaming them, and that's pretty common, right? And it can be common even within silos. The sales department is blaming marketing, marketing is blaming sales. It can be silo blaming as well. What's my quote is, "You travel fastest on the road to hell on the bus of blame." Right.
Yes.
So whether it's corporate hell or personal hell, but that blame game. So walk us through how to recognize the patterns rather than the blame.
Yeah, so recognizing patterns is seeing what the behavior is connected to. So, another big pattern that tends to run organizations, I'll give you another example at an infrastructure company. So, they
Yeah.
were doing very big infrastructure projects. So, they might be digging for oil in the desert or drilling for gas in the frozen sands of Canada, and they were losing money on these big infrastructure contracts. And when I went in there, one of the things I noticed was that they were caught in what I call the nice guy or gal pattern. So
Mm.
managers had stepped into role of nice guys and they wanted to be liked. So the agreement was we want to be liked more than we want to perform on our jobs for our clients. So this agreement was being held at every part of the organization. And I walked into the CEO's office, Ben, one day, and he said, Siobhan, I'm really frustrated. And I said, what's going on, Ben? He said, well, I asked the head of marketing to put up a billboard on the head office roof about 3 months ago, and it still hasn't appeared. And I'm like, that's frustrating. Who have you talked to? And he said, I've talked to the head of finance, I've talked to you, I've talked to the head of sales. Basically, he talked to everybody in his team except Ben, the head of marketing, because he was also in the role of Mr. Nice Guy, wanting to be liked more than he wanted to give feedback. So what you have to do is see, what is that behavior of non-performance on contracts related to? And actually, it was related to the fact that people didn't give feedback. There were no consequences for poor performance. You could lose money on your contract and still remain in your job or within the company. They just kept moving the non-performers onto other roles. So seeing what is the behavior connected to that you're seeing, because it's never sitting in isolation.
Right. So now we've got into the people side of it again, which is the, i.e. people wanting to be nice guys, which is often disastrous. But, we have to come back to, I think the poorly named HR, and I'll tell you why I poorly named in a minute, but poorly named HR, who are employing or taking these people in. But I don't see the problem there. I see the problem is if we don't know our purpose and we haven't laid out our culture, then HR are interviewing for positions as opposed to people for positions. So it seems to me like the problem is there in that, we could be blaming HR going, well, you're employing these people who are all nice guys, but you don't have a policy, you don't have a culture or even a purpose in your organization that's saying, this is who we are, this is what matters to us, this is what our values are. So it seems like it's these tiers. Is that right? Is that how you see it?
It's multi-layered and it is complex, but essentially it begins with people like Ben, the head of the infrastructure company, seeing the role that he's taking up. So when I mentioned that, I said, oh, so you've spoken to everybody, Ben, but you haven't talked to your head of marketing. His jaw dropped. I was like, oh my goodness, am I fueling the pattern, the nice guy pattern, Siobhan? I said, yeah, well, you're in the role of nice guy with your head of marketing. He walked out of the office and went into his head of marketing's office and said, I need to see the billboard. When are you going to get it installed for me? So immediately he started to shift that pattern in the organization by taking up a different role and moving out of nice guy role and into performance manager role. And that started to shift the pattern, because what was happening in the infrastructure company was, as soon as you join, you get captured by the pattern. So at ANZ, as soon as you joined, if you joined in a branch, what did you do? Within a week, you were pointing the finger at head office. They're to blame. If you joined head office, you were complaining about how shoddy the customer service was in the branches. You get swept up and caught by the pattern, and soon it's a bit like in a family, Dove.
Exactly.
Dysfunctional families don't even know they're dysfunctional.
No, and that's what that's what I'm saying is, so it's the challenge is, though, that people in a dysfunctional family, using that analogy, don't know that it's dysfunctional until they get out, right? So then they step away, they go off to college or they get married or whatever it is, and they suddenly like, Jesus, this is dysfunctional. Okay, great. The problem is that for these organizations, everybody's already in the family. And that what's more is, if you marry into the family, i.e. you become an employee, you also marry into this dysfunctional behavior. So let's pretend that we've got a viewer or listener, because there's only one who's listening. Right? Nobody's experiencing this in real life, of course, right? Who is going, yeah, okay, I agree. We are completely dysfunctional, but I'm in this, and I'm a boss, but I'm not the boss, right? I'm not the, I don't run the board. I'm not the CEO, but I am C-suite. This is who we are. What do you say to them? Because they got to be feeling pretty trapped inside that. I just married this person and now I'm in the family, and I got to show up at Christmas.
Yeah, well, I say to them that you can change the culture from any part of the organization. No matter where you start, your behavior has a ripple effect. So it doesn't matter where you're located, you can still have an impact. So start now, see what role you're taking up that is fueling the dysfunction in the culture. And you hit the nail on the head when you said step outside,
Yep.
step back. I talk about a captain of a ship. The captain of the ship doesn't spend all the time on the deck. The
No.
captain, he or she, they've got to get up onto the bridge position. What can you see on the bridge? You can see the clouds on the horizon. You can see the storms as they emerge. You can see the opportunities, the new lands, the new horizons. So step out of it and see, how am I fueling the behavior? And then I talk about the remarkable power of role reframing.
Okay, so let's talk a little
Reframe
bit
your
about that.
role.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at ANZ, what we did was we reframed the role of head office. So instead of being the order giver, they were now the support provider to the branches, providing them with IT support or legal help or HR help, basically there to help the branches step into their new role of order from order taker to customer service provider. So we implemented this new operating model. We reframed the roles of the different parts, and within a very short period of time, we saw these different parts take up a completely different role. And we helped fuel that by making sure that every person in head office spent a day every 6 months in a branch. And suddenly they started to see that, life wasn't just the palace they were living in head office, that actually these poor branch employees were living in a different world, trying to meet the needs of customers without the right systems, without the right branch environment. So things started to shift, Dove.
It's interesting. One of the things that I'm an advocate of, I don't know if it's shown in Australia where you are, but I can't say I've seen a lot of the shows. I've seen a few of the shows, but I love the idea, and because I do it, so we're brought in and we do it, and it's an Undercover Boss. And
Yes.
you get that show? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
love that show.
and the idea of it, of course, is you come out of your ivory tower and you go and you mop the floor and you serve the fries. In other words, you go to the base level. When you're taking, in the bank example, when those executives are going and spending, a day in a branch or whatever it is, are they going in as observers, or are they going in as, you don't know who I am, I'm just Betty and I'm here for the day?
They're going in as workers. So they
Okay.
actually have to be on their feet all day serving customers. And that was an eye opener. For many of them, they came back to head office and said, wow, I really need to take up a different role here. The branches don't have the right systems. They're looking really shabby. We don't have the data to help our customers when they eventually get to the top of the queue. We don't have any answers for them, and they have to wait weeks for head office to come back with an answer that's not even right. So it started to really accelerate this reframe of the branches having the data and being able to make all of this decisions that they needed to make to serve the customer better.
So it's interesting because a lot of what you're talking about is to me seems like dismantling the power, power at the top. It's still there, but it's distributing that power in a way that can only be done by the person at the top experiencing life at the bottom. Is that a way of putting
Yes,
it?
in that particular instance with ANZ, that
Mhm.
was absolutely correct. But with Ben at the infrastructure company, it was a different pattern that
Right.
he was taught by. And it's like every family is unique, every organization in terms of their culture is unique, and it's never a one size fits all. So people say, oh, I've got this off the shelf solution to my
No.
culture problem, and I'm going to create a culture that's blah blah blah. And I said, well, that might have worked for the ANZ Bank, but that's not necessarily going to work for you. And this is where I say you've got to, the first step in the 4-step process in my book, The Insider's Guide to Culture Change, is diagnose. Most people miss that step. They rush straight to the solution because leaders are under so much pressure to take action and to get the solutions fast, and they miss the diagnose step.
So as we come to the end of the first half of part one of our 2-part show here, let's talk a little bit about how do we begin to diagnose? Because people are listening, watching, and they're going, this is very interesting. I'm fascinated by this. I can see there's problems in our culture, but I don't know where to start, because it can seem like, needle in a haystack and very confusing.
Yes, it's a great question. One of the things to do is to engage, if you've got a good HR team, engage them, but also team them up with an external person, with an outsider. Because as with your family, we talked about families and how outsiders can look at the family and say, oh gosh, that's dysfunctional. The same with you and your business. Often you are caught by these patterns. So ask your HR team to lead a project, get an external person in and get some feedback. And the thing about feedback is that you've got to get it from different parts. So for example, with the ANZ, I could have gone in there and just gone, oh, well, the problem is with the branches. Let's put all the branches on customer service training. What do you think would have happened if we had intervened in that way? In some ways, it would have accelerated the pattern of blame, because the branch staff would have said, oh, they don't even trust us. They don't even think we can do our jobs. They're sending us off on this customer service training, and it's their fault, not our fault. So the thing with it is you've got to see the culture from multiple parts and to be able to connect. What is the agreement between these parts? Because actually they're in a perfect agreement to blame each other and not change. So you've got to see what I say is the pattern or the agreement between the parts. That is the important thing to see. And that you can see not necessarily by surveys. Surveys won't give you this data. No. Which is why you really need to get a small team together and looking at it.
So I'm going to just push back a bit on that as we come to the end here, which is that, okay, you bring somebody in from the outside to work with your HR team, but you're an outsider. You know what I mean? So we're not going to give you all the info. We're only going to give you the info that works in our favor, because that happens too, right?
Yes.
I'm brought in as an external into organizations. You're brought in as an external to organizations. And it's like, well, we're not going to give you quite all the information.
Yes.
Because it's going to be a bias. We're going to give you the biased opinion.
Yes.
How do we deal with that?
It's a great point. It can work the other way as well. Sometimes organizations can say, I don't trust HR. I'd like to talk to an external objective person. But the key thing here is that you set up the agreements right at the beginning, so the rules of engagement are really clear, and you've got to make it anonymous. So it can't be a witch hunt. Oh, well, I talked to Dove and he thinks leadership team is away with the fairies. It can't be attributed to people. So there's got to be a few key rules of engagement, including the fact that it's anonymous, including the fact that people would be protected. They will not, this is not a witch hunt. They will not, findings will not be attributed to them. So some of those clear rules of engagement can allow people to feel more confident about what they say and what they reveal.
Well, this is fabulous. Thank you, Siobhan. I appreciate it. We're already at the end of our first part of our 2-part interview here with Siobhan McHale. And before we finish up here, Siobhan, please tell our listeners, our viewers, where they can find out more about you, your book, your new book, and all your resources. And we'll come back in for part 2.
Yeah, my book, The Insider's Guide to Culture Change, How to Create Workplaces That Deliver, Grow, and Adapt, is available on Amazon. And the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. But please follow me, because I can't connect. I've reached my connections limit.
Yeah, so make sure that you follow Siobhan, because she's got like 9,472,000 people.
Not that many.
pretty. She got a lot of people on LinkedIn following her. So you can follow her there. You can stay in touch with her. And of course, we will make sure that we post all of the links in the show notes. We'll be back in just a click away for part 2 with our interview with Siobhan McHale. And we hope that you'll stay with us. And please remember, we need your help by rate, review, and subscribing to the show and sharing the show with everybody you know. We'll see you in one click. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.